Hello and welcome to Mangator 96, and today we have the review of One Piece chapter 1017 titled Orders. We're back from the break and Oda once again showcased in this chapter that he is a master of cramming as much important information into a small number of pages as possible, with him using the first 10 pages to finish Tama's role in Onigashima, with her giving her orders and the gifters turning on the beast pirates, creating even more chaos on Onigashima. This was by far the weakest segment of this week's chapter, with it feeling more of a chore that needed to be done to move on to more exciting things, and it certainly did, as after the confrontation between Sanji and Queen we learned the name of the science group that he, Judge, and Vegapunk were part of. We see Queen's hybrid form as well as Chopper's new side effect after using Monster Point, which is pretty funny. We got away on how Zoro is going to return into the fight, and lastly, we learn of who is who's past. We see his hybrid form and the shocking cliffhanger with Luffy's Gomu Gomu Fruit being much more important than what we thought initially. Now let's save all that for later and start at the beginning of this week's chapter. On the cover this week we have the great Buggy, who is playing with a monkey. What I must say about this cover page is that Buggy's design wise looks the best that he looked in the whole series. So if he could have a similar design when he reappears in the story, it will be a great improvement in my eyes. Moving on into the contents of this week's chapter, we start off with Tama, who is trying to give her orders to the gifters, but is knocked out temporarily by Queen's Supreme King Saki. Jokes aside, she is intimidated by Queen, so Nami and Usopp need to help her get back on her feet. While Usopp and Nami treat Tama, we get various scenes around Onigashima where Oda showcases what the difference in numbers means, and surprisingly that it actually matters when we look on some of the calibers that are struggling precisely because they are outnumbered. That way we see Jinbe, who is surrounded on all sides with who is who's subordinates shooting at him while he is fighting who is who. Jinbe, as the calm and collected badass that he is, takes this situation as a matter of fact, as he says that their job is to take down Kaido's officers. Then we shift scenes to Frankie, who also can't have his one-on-one with Sasaki in peace because the other beast pirates keep interfering. And unlike Jinbe, Frankie doesn't take this calmly. Then again we shift locations to see a man that upon his introduction was depicted as this big threat, but in reality he is the character who has taken the most L's in this story, with the only way for him to win is by using cheap tricks, from poisonous gas to know the numerical advantage of soldiers. I'm of course talking about Jack. We see how Ino has an arrow sticking out of his back with him being surrounded by beast pirates. Meanwhile, Jack is trying to find excuses in this being a war for using his subordinates rather than fighting him one-on-one, which is a sound argument if we would apply real-world logic, but Jack boy, you're a fucking mammoth fighting a one-legged dog who is already half dead because of the beating that he received from your boss. So be a man for once and face the dying dog in a one-on-one, or you can retire from the pirate business and start a circus with your subordinates. After those scenes, Tama is back up on her feet and she manages to give her orders to all the gifters on Onigashima who ate her dangos. While she is giving her orders, we see brief panels from Luffy, who is in the polar tank and is receiving treatment from the hard pirates, and Momo and Shinobu, who are fine as expected, but for where they are right now it's impossible to tell from that one panel. After Tama gave her orders, we see the gifters turning sides. This is most apparent in the scenes with Jinbe and Ino, with the gifters clearing the fodder around them so they could have their one-on-ones with their respective opponents. We also see a brief scene of the CP0 who are confused by this sudden turn of events. Then Queen for once uses his side as he comes pretty quickly to the conclusion that Tama is the one responsible for the gifters turning sides. He tries to take her out with his laser beam but is stopped by Sanji. Annoyed by that, Queen keeps referring to Sanji as Judge's son, on which Sanji makes the conclusion that Queen and his father worked together on that research team in the past. Queen confirms this by giving us the name of the research team that was called MATS, quite a fitting name for a research team that Judge, Queen and Vegapunk were part of. But the real question here is which of the researchers was the most normal one, because the two that we know of aren't really sane persons. Either way, Queen then transforms into his hybrid form, and I must say that speaking purely what he looks like without his cyborg parts, this form is bland. But that's something that is a running theme for me with the hybrid forms in this arc, with Drake's, Kaido's, now Queen's and Who's hybrid forms being really meh, with only Ulti and Page 1 having good looking hybrid forms so far. As I said, Queen's pure Devil Fruit hybrid form is bland, but if you consider the cyborg parts, it does become much better. It's especially interesting that his hair is also mechanical, so I'm really looking forward to all the tricks that Queen has in store in his cyborg body. Then we see how Chopper and Zoro are doing, with Chopper's new side effect being revealed, turning him into the size of a Tuntata with the personality of an old man. This side effect is unexpected, but it's better from the previous one where he couldn't move for 3 hours. We learned that the Minks have some kind of medicine that could enable Zoro to join the fight again, but it has a side effect that it doubles the pain after it wears off. Now, I won't jump the gun and say that this drug out of nowhere is bullshit, as long as it wears off in a critical moment when Zoro is fighting King or whoever, which will force Zoro to go beyond the nothing happened moment, with consequences that will last into the next arc, similarly like it was at Sabaody. But if that doesn't happen, I really don't see the point of introducing this medicine when you could have solved this problem with Marco's ability to an extent. Well, we'll have to wait and see what the end result of this will be before making any conclusions. For the last part of this chapter, we're back with Jinbe and Husso, where we finally see their battle in more detail. The first thing that we see is that the sword that Husso is carrying around isn't actually a sword, but rather a dagger. I question the practicality of carrying a small dagger in a hilt that is 2 meters or more long, but it seems that Husso likes it that way. To each their own, I guess. But the real important thing that we see here is Husso's fighting style, where we see that he uses the 6 powers, with him using a variation of the finger pistol with his dagger, as well as Zoro or Shave and Tempest Kick. Jinbe and Husso do look like they are even match for each other. As Husso is transforming into his hybrid form, he gets some information on his backstory in his conversation with Jinbe. But before we come to his background, I would like to point out that the design of Who's Devil Fruit forms is the worst out of all the zone users that we've seen in this arc. So if Yamato indeed has the mythical white tiger fruit, I hope that it isn't as boring as the saber-tooth tiger one. Now going into the important part, and that's Who's backstory, where we learn that he was once a bright prospect who was considered to be a rival of Rob Luce, but because he failed a mission 12 years ago, he was imprisoned by the world government. He broke out of prison at some point, and as he was on the run, he joined Kaido's crew. Now, it isn't stated that he was imprisoned solely because he failed this mission 12 years ago, but on how much focus this incident received in this chapter, it's reasonable to assume that that is indeed the case. But before we cover this incident 12 years ago and the big cliffhanger, there was a brief action scene before, where we saw yet another new variant of the finger pistol, where instead of his fingers, Husso uses his fangs to fire the pistol. It does look cool, and it certainly has power as he did chop down half of a big pillar, but his attack isn't a problem for Jinbe, who dodges it easily. After this failed attack, we get the big revelation in which Jinbe questions who's who, what the problem he has with him, as clearly from his story those two have never crossed paths. Which is indeed true, as who's who doesn't have a problem with Jinbe personally, but he has a problem with Jinbe being a part of the Straw Hats, as it is revealed that the incident 12 years ago involved who's who being unable to protect a certain devil fruit that was being transported on a government ship, the devil fruit in question being Luffy's Gomu Gomu Fruit, and on that revelation we end this week's chapter. Now, this is quite shocking, with the Gomu Gomu Fruit being apparently so important that the government felt the need to transport it on their ship, with being guarded by a top member of the CP9 at the time. It also raises the question what Shanks wanted to do with the Gomu Gomu Fruit in the first place, as throughout this story it was portrayed as someone who wants to avoid conflict if it's possible, and now for someone like that to attack a government ship for a fruit that combat-wise isn't anywhere near at the level of other top tier fruits means that the reason that it's so special has to do with its previous user. But here's the problem with that. If someone of note like say Zebek or Roger had this fruit previously, someone would have mentioned this fact by now, after seeing Luffy, as his devil fruit power is common knowledge for the people of the One Piece world at this point. So I really don't see what's so special with the Gomu Gomu Fruit. If it was something combat wise, you'd think that Luffy would have figured it out at this point, with him being a protege fighter that he is. The same can be said for any previous user that may have had this fruit in the recent past. The only thing that would make sense if his Joy Boy had the Gomu Gomu Fruit 800 years ago, and that's the reason why nobody mentioned it so far, but I think that is also a stretch. Either way, Oda really gave us something to speculate for the next week or even longer if he doesn't address this next chapter. All in all, this was a really good chapter of One Piece, especially the second half, with its many revelations and things to speculate about. And that will be all for this video. If you like this video, leave a like, leave your thoughts in the comments below, or subscribe to the channel for more One Piece content as well as other manga content, and until next time, take care.